Liberty Tactics, Guerrilla Media Network. You are tuned in to Liberty Tactics on the Guerrilla Media Network. The truth, exposing lies. Liberty Tactics on the Guerrilla Media Network.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Tactics for this very romantic 14th of February. I always forget what time Valentine's Day is. 2014.
Yep, just
we got there in the end. We had a little bit of internet problems at the beginning, but that's probably because we're talking Jesuits today, and
you sound like a conspiracy.
As soon as you mention the Jesuit word, that everything goes tits up, basically. In the news generally, head over to libertytactics.com. Robert Greene, who has been working to expose some of the paedophile rings in the UK, was arrested yesterday. So we've got all the information up there. If you've not heard, go check that out right now. But we're going to get over straight to our guests today, which we're really excited to have. Michael is joining me this week. Hello. Michael. And we've got Keith Hansen and Gordon Comstock. Keith, previously known as Vyzygoth, and we're going to have a discussion about some of the history of the Jesuit Order, which I believe is quite an important subject that isn't touched upon very often. So we'll get straight into it. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
So I'm here. Hope you're well. Is the weather treating you okay over there? We're in massive flood conditions in the UK.
I'm building an ark as we speak.
I can't complain. Who's gonna feel sorry for me? I'm down here at 75 degrees. The sun is out, and I got allergies.
Yeah. Oh, you poor guy. So the Jesuits have been in the news a bit more than usual recently, because we've got our new Pope Francis came into office, and he is a public member of the Jesuits. So I thought it was a good sort of opportunity to have you guys on and sort of go into a bit of the history of the order, and maybe why exactly we're seeing so much positive news coming out of the Catholic Church, where in the past couple of years, the Vatican has had to go through quite a few scandals, and we're wondering if there's any significance with it. So wherever you'd like to start, really, Keith.
Well, Gordon, you want to take that first?
Well, I may be best at just citing books for you guys to check out, or for the audience to check out. I know when it comes to the Vatican control of the media, one author stands out, although a number of authors get into it. George Seldes, an American journalist from the early 20th century. He wrote a number of books focusing upon the Romanist control of at least the U.S. media. Mm-hmm. And their ability to suppress scandal. So the fact that scandals would be coming out, I mean, how I would see it is that it must really be bad behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you the long version.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Pope Francis. Michael, you sent me an email and said, is this just like a groovy guy, or what's going on here? Or is it a PR thing? It's both. Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church has gotten a lot of bad publicity, but I also think that the long-range goal in the New World Order is one religion. Mm-hmm. And I think that Francis is probably the guy selected to not only increase the laity of the Catholic Church, but to embrace all religions, let's say. And so ecumenism is probably on his agenda, which is not his agenda. Mm-hmm. And not only to combat whatever bad PR there is because of what's been going on with the Catholic priests and pedophilia, but beyond that, I think it's also a goal of theirs to be as inclusive as possible, to embrace as many people as they can bring into whether it's Catholicism or whatever they want to call it Cursolo, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's the guy that's doing it. What struck me strange, though, and nobody called him on this, but at one point he said something like, "I'm a sinner like everyone else." And I'm like, well, when last we looked, wasn't the Pope supposed to be infallible?
Well, yeah, but only after, Go ahead. Only after 1848, right? That's when they contrived that.
Well, but the thing is, now all of a sudden that's not the case, and nobody's making a big deal about it. Personally, I don't care. But I think Francis is there, and as Michael, as you'd written to me, he's doing both. He's a decent guy, very personable, and he's there for PR as well. So I think this is a great move toward ecumenism, which sounds good to everybody on face. But as you know, you can only serve one God. Which one is it that you would like to serve?
On that subject, I mean, we know we've had a push towards a one world sort of religion, whether it was a spiritual religion or a sort of Gaia worship religion where we're supposed to be all coming together, because everything in this new world order has to be monolithic. We've got one government, one religion, one currency. That's the way it's going. And philosophy, which is sort of the UN, were the Jesuit Order involved with the setup of that particular movement, or?
Personally, I can't say that was the case whatsoever. I don't know. A lot of the things that may be somewhat attached to them or thought to have been wrought by them, you may never find the footprints that lead you there. So I can't tell you that it's the case. I suspect it might be, but I can't tell you that. But I also find it interesting, too, that who was the main driver behind the UN, and especially being in the United States, was the Rockefeller clan. And the UN, in fact, is built on Rockefeller property. But I find it also interesting that Rockefeller would construct 30 Rock. Are you guys familiar with that, 30 Rock?
Yeah, the address, yeah.
Yeah, okay. 30 Rock is also where NBC broadcasts out of, and it's across the street from Madison Avenue from St. Patrick's Cathedral. I'll just leave it at that.
So let's get back into, if we can get a little bit, touch briefly on the history of the order, its general startings, its links to the secret society network, and then going into where it looks like the order basically moved into their modern role. I mean, they've got their fingers in arms dealership, arms companies, as you said, media. So if you could just give us like a very brief history, because we know time is short, before we move on to the next subjects, just so that people have an idea of just how old this order is.
Yeah, Gordon, you want to go first?
Well, I know the general outline. Well, they were started by Ignatius Loyola, who had his, leg blown apart in a battle. And he swore in his recuperation, he was very power hungry. In his recuperation, he taught himself a bunch of what he called spiritual exercises, and they're kind of spooky to read what they are. But he swore to the Pope at that time to become the head of the Counter-Reformation. This was in the height of the nadir of papal power at that time, during when Martin Luther was alive and Calvin. And so Loyola spearheaded the Counter-Reformation, and in time, he was very successful, but in time, the Jesuits outgrew the papacy itself.
And
all right, let me. The reason I let Gordon go first is because I had come upon something that I just wanted to wait and hold back a little bit. It might give you somewhat of an answer, kind of encyclopedically, to what you had asked. There's a book out there that you can read on Google called Corporations. That's a short title. It's by John P. Davis. And he was talking about all forms of corporations, and this is another whole thing I understand. But corporations are some kind of monster that human beings created. And using that monster, the corporation that is, it can achieve whatever it wants. It's above government because they've already subjugated governments to corporations. But in Davis's book, he has a chapter, I think it's chapter 3, called Ecclesiastical Corporations. And in section 10, let me just do this real quickly, okay? Talk about the Jesuits' corporations, 1534 to 1773. Says Loyola founded the Society of Jesus in 1534, but it received the formal approval of the church only in 1540. Now, understand something, too. The Jesuits have been thrown out, brought back, thrown out, brought back. by the Catholic Church. There was a brawl going on for quite some time, but probably around 1814, 1822, the papacy realized it needed the Jesuits to survive, and yet there were still some popes who kicked the Jesuits out, only for the Jesuits to, and I'll read something later that's almost comical to you, that's recalled in papers that everybody's forgotten, about what happens when you're not nice to the Jesuits. But let me just say this, as Davis wrote, the aims of the Jesuits, okay? Positively, the promotion of the interests of the Roman Catholic Church, and negatively, the undoing of the work of the Reformation by suppressing Protestantism, as indicated from their point of view by their motto, ad majorem Dei gloriam, that the means employed had close reference to the conditions of the time. As Protestantism was largely an assertion of individual reason against authority, they aimed to suppress it by maintaining colleges of their own and working their way into other institutions of learning. I can go on and on about that, but I mean, get the kind of gist that the Jesuits are not seen by anybody. When you bring them up, as some of your listeners are listening to right now, they think we're crazy. And I thought the person that turned me onto it was crazy until I realized through some kind of follow-up that there are much information, there's many footprints that you can follow about the Jesuits across this globe, but they have been absolutely erased, especially in the United States. So when you bring it up, everybody laughs at you because, well, let me just say this. I don't know if you guys saw the movie, The Usual Suspects. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right. Now, do you remember the person that was the heavy hitter, the guy that was Kaiser Soze, was it?
Yeah,
was Kevin Spacey, right? Who was a gimp. And why did he succeed? Because nobody thought he was capable of it.
Yeah.
Well, what we're saying about the Society of Jesus, everyone laughs at them because it seems like, oh, come on. I mean, the name of the group is Society of Jesus. Who can be bad with Jesus in their name? Give me a break.
Well, we certainly don't associate anything really militaristic, do we? But the more you sort of research into them, like you say, there's definitely this military sort of bent to what they do. And the thing that interests me is their involvement in education. And I wonder whether either of you could speak to that in terms of how far that stretches and how it manifests itself within education, both in the US and around the world.
I'll flip it to Gordon in just a second, but remember, technically, the Society of Jesus was founded as a military order, which is the reason why their head, the Black Pope, he's called AKA, he's a superior general. And there's no two ways about it. Now, we'll get into the education element, but Gordon, I know you wanted to say something, so I'll step aside if you want to get in there.
Oh, well, real quick, if you want a really good, succinct history of the Jesuits, read the book, The Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmund, Oh, gosh, I just had it.
You talk about it, I'll go find it.
Edmund Paris, a French. But there are a number of others. But what you'll find with these books is invariably they are out of print, and that to me is a tip-off. Now, you want to talk about education, there were a number of books in the late 1800s by American writers that were screaming against what Rome was doing to take over, subvert education in America. One of them was John Brandt, America or Rome, Christ or the Pope. Somebody that's contemporary, that has a lot of information about that on his website, is Charles Wilcox. He has a lot of information about how, in the late 1800s, the Vatican sent over a henchman named Satolli, Satolli, to go around the country and basically undermine, subvert American education and turn it into under the control of Rome. And what Wilcox applies to on his site, at least he did, I think it's in his book too, The Transformation of the Republic. He's got some really spooky headlines, newspaper headlines from various cities describing this in the late 1800s, how this Cardinal Satolli was going around the country undermining American education.
So where does that fit with the whole Prussian education system then? Because, I'm sure you're familiar with Gatto and Isitby and others who've talked about that and how that was introduced, with a view to creating obedience to authority and everything like that. And Illich, of course, as well, talks about similar things.
Gustav Myers had written a book called The German Myth. That's a short title. And in it just included the Prussian model of education, which is basically to subject all the students to accept whatever role that they were given in life. And also, and this is the short version of it, there were three goals, but the short version is and make them believe, more or less, that they should subjugate themselves, to the state, and that the state was all. Basically, just become good little widgets. Now, that is something that is the goal by any kind of totalitarian society organization, just to get full compliance to whatever the power structure is. The Jesuits want that. They hate democracy. They want obedience. And one of the things they tried to do back, at least in the 19th century, was reinstall as many monarchies as they could. And also, let's remember something, that a monarch, an individual, is more easily dealt with than to have to deal with a democratic society. So, along with education as well, the Jesuits don't mind a dumbed-down curriculum anywhere in the United States or in the world, which is what I think we have right now. And it doesn't matter if it's a send-down from the Wundt Experimental School or the Frankfurt School or the Prussian School. The thing is, it's more about indoctrination and training than education. However, the Jesuits on a collegiate level, on a university level, have the best education that money can buy. And in the United States, you can see that in Notre Dame, the Loyola system, Villanova, Marquette, to name a few. So,
and the ruling centers of the U.S., Georgetown and Fordham.
There you go. Yeah, Loyola, Baltimore. There, so.
And we hear a lot about the Illuminati, especially with all those cheesy pop stars and R&B stars. But Adam Weishaupt, the founder, one of the founders of the Illuminati Society, was Jesuit trained as well. And wasn't it because basically the Jesuits were kicked out at the time of Germany?
Among other places, I believe.
They've basically been, at one point or another, been kicked out of every country in Europe, just about. Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, here's the other thing, too. I used to refer to everything that I didn't understand or couldn't contain under any other umbrella term but the Illuminati. Mm-hmm. And that name continues on, but I'm not so sure the Illuminati didn't die in a sense, or at least transform into something else, and it could have been subsumed by the Jesuits. But, yeah, obviously Weishaupt was around at the time. And I would say that, yes, the Jesuits were on the run, let's say, before, as we had mentioned before, around 1814 or 1822. And so in the late 18th century, they were underground, and Weishaupt, too, apparently just more or less melted into the ages. But I'll say this, after I realized, let me just add this also, okay? It may not be important to people who sits on top of the hill. And to a certain extent, I can understand that. If you don't understand religion or don't believe in it, that according to the Bible, then all this doesn't really mean anything to you because you reject religion. What this revealed to me is that what the Bible says is true. And the supposed takeover by Satan, which I think we're going through right now, we call it an NWO, is presided over by Satan himself. And that comes out of Rome.
It warned us of this frightening ecumenical movement, too. Rome being the mother harlot, and all these little Protestant daughter harlots are returning to the fold of the mother.
I don't know. It seems like they take it as a playbook at the very least.
Sorry, go ahead. James, I'm sorry, I stepped all over you.
Oh, sorry, man. I was just saying they certainly seem to be taking a lot of the Bible as a playbook, anyways, especially out of Revelations. Just basically how the entire system is being set up. I've seemed to have found connections as well with other movements such as communism and that with the order. It seems that basically where you may have things like the Illuminati, communism, and all these other isms, of course, there was a lot of ties with the whole Nazi movement. It just seems that behind that, there was always these, Jesuit figures, which seem to always be at these pivotal points in history.
Well, we were discussing before we came on air, weren't we, the amount of military uniforms that seem to include within them the Knights of Malta Cross, for example.
Well, yeah, you could find that everywhere. I'm just amazed at how many times that pops up. I mean, in the United States, you can look at it. I mean, the Klan wore it, for one. I mean, Nazi Germany embraced it as well. So I mean, as far as the symbolism and all that goes, it is ubiquitous. I was thinking back to something that Michael had written me, and I'm looking for it now, and I'm kind of not being able to find it. But, okay, now I know where I want to go. I would say real quickly to folks, if they want to read a very hard-hitting but very thorough and accurate account of especially the Jesuits' role in Europe, it's a book called Behind the Dictators. And I think, Michael, didn't you use that as a title also in the talking points you sent me?
Yeah, it was one of in the bibliography you had sent me, it was one of the things that I had picked out and sort of, it certainly caught my eye, definitely, yeah.
Well, the reason I'm saying this is because better than we can explain it in an hour or 2 hours, because this has been going on forever. We compiled a bibliography, yes, that I did give you guys, over 80 books. Some of them go back to the mid-19th century. We keep finding more and more all the time that are decent accounts of what has gone on, and yet it's been scrubbed pretty much from the historical record. But anyway, there's a great website called archive.org, and you can go in there and you can pop in the text section, click for text, not any other media types, Behind the Dictators. It's written by L.H. Lehman in 1942, and it will tell you...
It goes into the infighting, right? Is that right? The infighting within the church?
Among other things. The infighting in the... Yes, it's in there. Personally, I don't direct myself to that. To me, what I look for, and Gordon may be, and I'll throw this to Gordon. Gordon may be more deep in background than I am with that. What I'm looking for is the way that they have, the Jesuits have, extended their power on rulers to get them to do what they want. Now, I said this because there are 3 works out there that don't seem to have, I guess, a satisfactory authorship. And I would suspect they were written by others than what we were told they were. One of them is the Protocols of Zion,
which layman addresses.
Aren't you?
Right, exactly. The second is the Manifesto of the Communist Party. And not in the chronological order, but the third is Mein Kampf. Yeah. The reason why I say that is in 2 cases at least, I don't think Hitler was capable of writing Mein Kampf, and it was very pro-Jesuit and pro-Catholic.
The book was a mess as well from the parts that I've looked at.
Say that again?
Sorry, the book was a mess by all accounts from the parts that and the little bits of it that I've looked at.
Yeah, and the other thing is with the Communist Manifesto, again, I read that and I'm like, Marx didn't write that. I'm sorry. Marx wrote
Engels is said to have as well, yeah?
Yeah. When Engels was the very bourgeois that they were supposedly railing against. So, I mean, can I prove it? No. Although there is some connectivity there. But could I prove it in a court of law? No. But I would suspect that those 3 documents, the one that are embraced most, I guess, by those who believe in such a global secret society that could take over everything, they point everywhere except to the Jesuits, and yet I do believe that they are behind that. Gordon, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at a reference to the infighting. Yeah, I heard you guys talk about a minute ago. I know of a great book for that.
Well, go ahead, because I can't speak to that, so why don't you do that, Gordon?
Avro Manhattan. And I don't necessarily trust him all the way. He was supposedly a Protestant Knight of Malta, which is creepy to me, but I think there is a whole lot of truth in his books, nevertheless. I've read several of his books. The one that deals specifically with the infighting between the so-called, the liberal Catholics versus the more hardcore Orthodox or Inquisitional Catholics. The book is The Vatican, Washington, Moscow Alliance by Avro Manhattan. It deals with the infighting in the 20th century of the Vatican.
You mentioned the Knights of Malta. Is that specifically a Jesuit order, or is what connection is that with because we got the Knights of Malta, we got Nelson Mandela, which was all over the media a few months ago. The Queen. We've got Tony Blair, ex-UK Prime Minister, is a Knight of Malta. Are they connected somehow with the Jesuit order?
Yes, they are. The scariest thing to me is basically to be the head of an intelligence agency anywhere in the world. You pretty much have to be a Knight of Malta.
Mm-hmm.
if you take a look at some of the heads of the last CIA and FBI, they're Knights of Malta.
Mm-hmm.
Now, understand something also, and that is we have this connection between a fallen Germany after World War II, the Vatican, and the Western Hemisphere. I don't know if you want to go there, but real quickly, the way the CIA was created was through the secretion from Europe and safety provided by the Vatican to certain SS and Nazi leaders into the Western Hemisphere. And in the United States in particular, certain former SS were charged with converting what was the OSS into the CIA. And that's another thing, and this goes on later on, that may have been a nail in Kennedy's coffin, was that he wanted to dismantle the CIA, which was a construct supported by the Vatican with SS intelligence and structure.
Smash it into 1,000 pieces, he said, right?
Yes, he did. And can I share one anecdote with you?
Mm-hmm.
I was too little to understand this, but I only realized later on exactly what was going on when I wasn't paying attention. I was like 5 or 6, and I used to get brought with my family over to a particular uncle's house, okay? And it was Christmas time, and on this one Christmas celebration, my uncle, who used to like to get the glow on, would start getting into some serious stuff. I mean, he was former OSS, okay, but he didn't stay with the OSS. He went into security for a major department store chain in New York and stayed with them until the end of his employ. But there was a time when he would get kind of like loosened up, and then he started holding court. And I was, like I said, I was too young to understand, but the one thing I always remember him saying was, what we did was treasonous. It was treasonous. I know that's kind of general, but it's one of those things when you're a little kid, you hear, you kind of forget about, but you don't. And then later on, when I became aware of the connection between the SS and the CIA, I wondered if my uncle saw what was happening and that transition taking place. And I'm not saying it made him go out, leave, but I'm sure it didn't help. And I often wonder if that's what he was telling everyone else in the room who probably was thinking it was attributed to the alcohol, which it was in a sense. But what he was saying was really factual. And I'll never know. Nobody can remember. There's not too many people left from those days anyway.
Mm. They seem to be so interboiled, and obviously there's the connections with the Nazi Party, and I mean you can see pictures of them at the Vatican. That's been quite well explored. Is there anything pre or post World War II that you'd like to touch on before we move on to say JFK?
I know I would, but again, let me defer you, Gordon.
While it occurs to me, if you don't mind, we were talking before we came on air as to the significance of the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki. If they were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we were thinking about the names, Little Boy and Fat Man, and whether there's any sort of symbolic, meaning behind that. And James, you
there was the Catholic Church, wasn't it? Was it in Nagasaki, which was sort of ground zero apparently for the bomb?
I know Eric John Phelps maintains that they chose the two cities in Japan, I think Nagasaki in particular, because according to Phelps, those were, at least in terms of Japan standards, those were two predominantly Protestant cities, more so than other Japanese cities. I don't know if that's true. And as Viz will attest, we trust a lot of what Phelps writes, but not everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't. And also, we have the situation with Dresden, which was probably
another one
more horrible. Yeah. Let me do this. I'm looking for something. Okay, here we go. You realize that the Jesuits, in fact, the novel Shogun speaks to the Jesuits being in Japan, in the 16th century or so.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think much about it, but they were there. And remember that in the 16th century, the Jesuits also made it over to South America, where they had camps they call reduction camps, which in a sense were slavery camps, where they were supposedly proselytizing the native peoples. The first slavers in the Western Hemisphere were Jesuits.
Yeah.
But with regard to Japan, just consider this, all right? There's a book entitled The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, written by Burke McCarty, the woman. She wrote it in 1924. Just consider what she wrote in this particular paragraph. It said, the next step in the Vatican's great scheme, and remember this is 1924, is to make war between this country, the U.S., and Japan, after the latter country has been placed under full dominance of the Jesuits. The priests, monks, and nuns of the Roman Church have been pouring into Japan from all over the world now for many years with that purpose in view. The writer was told by a Christian Japanese minister in charge of a Protestant mission in L.A., in reply to the question as to why the Jesuits, who had been barred from Japan, had now been permitted to enter. He answered that the Roman Church had gotten into his country, Japan, under the guise of Mohammedanism, now known as Muslim, and that after it was well entrenched threw off its disguise, and his country learned to its astonishment that it was to the Roman Church and its monastic orders it had opened its doors. But here's where it gets good. The Roman Catholic politician James Phelan was sent to the United States in 1913 by the solid Roman vote and has been the prime mover in the anti-Jap agitation. This is also a fact. It has also gone on to say that they were there to instigate anti-American sentiment for a future war. Now, she wrote that in 1924. Mm-hmm. You know, was she guessing? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, here you have what has taken place. Now, again, the Jesuits wanted to infiltrate Japan. At the time of World War II, I really don't know what the benefit was of detonating 2 atom bombs in Japan, since Japan was trying like crazy to surrender. So there was a benefit somewhere. Really, I don't know what it was, except in a sense to open up the atomic age. And in a sense, I think also to bring a certain kind of hatred towards the United States that's been, shall we say, kind of suppressed below the radar. But I don't think the world has ever forgotten that took place. And I think sooner or later, you know, we're going to find ourselves on the other end of that atomic age.
It's funny how sanitized that's become in terms of mainstream historians who discuss bombs as you say, Japan refusing to surrender when the sort of empirical evidence suggests everything to the contrary, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And that's why, you know, I mean, I don't love my country. I don't hate my country. But what I do understand is this. In the way of the world, this is how it goes. And just like the Nazi Reich, just like Napoleon's Grand Army, you know, you're a 700-pound gorilla one day, and the next you're thrown into the rocks. And that's what I fully feel is going to happen to the United States. We're walking around like nobody can beat us, like a real prideful bully. And I don't think we understand the comeuppance that we have coming. And although we've done all this good, still, you know, you got a country that's been warring for over a century. And I think when the day comes, you know, sometimes you eat the bear and sometimes the bear eats you. And I think it's, you know, our time is at hand, which is nothing anybody in the United States has ever even, I don't think, countenanced or could even deal with.
There are several newspaper headlines now suppressed, but in the days leading up to the dropping of the atomic bombs, which stated that the American newspapers, which stated the Japanese were trying to surrender. This is not generally taught and known by the American public. Now, the one thing that the Japanese were trying to do with their surrender was they wanted to keep their emperor and keep him in his place. They were willing to give up everything else. And it's interesting that when we went ahead and dropped the bombs, and then what's weird is we kept the emperor in place. The Japanese emperor was allowed to stay, but our terms dictated that he could no longer call himself a god. Now, can you think of another entity in the world that has a man who calls himself God that would not like that wouldn't stand for that? The only one's Rome.
And the order, if people look into, like, you know, the popes through history, and there's been some great documentaries. One of them was, I think, Tares Amongst the Wheat, which went into the role of the Vatican, and basically how they wish to instill the Pope as, well, I think one Pope even said that he was, you know, above the Christ, you know, because he was the god of this earth sort of
voice
thing.
on earth, isn't it?
So you can totally see that if you have people that are so incredibly power hungry, that would be an essential thing for them to do. So there was that in Japan, obviously. I'm sorry, I've just had we
were going to move on to think about the JFK assassination and any connections there. And in particular, I mean, something that's always been of interest to me has been that you mentioned Lincoln earlier. You know, there's this sort of urban myth, if you like, about the parallels between the JFK's life and Lincoln's life, as well as their assassinations. And I just wondered whether from the reading that you've both done, whether there was ritualism at work here. And if there was any Jesuit involvement. And
I think there was Jesuit, at least with the Lincoln. From
Right, let me ask you something, guys. How much time do we have?
We've got about 20 minutes left, mate.
That's it for us?
Yeah. We'll have to pick up maybe on a future show in a few weeks' time.
All right. Yeah, that's important. I didn't know if it was 1 or 2 hours. I wasn't sure. All right. The reason I say that is because, and I'm just going to go real quickly. In that book, Behind the Dictators, there is a couple of quotes that were taken from what they say was the September 16th edition of the New York Tribune. This is in 1886. And the reason I bring this up is because it's my way to go check this kind of stuff out. And I did this just today, knowing we were going to come on. So there is a great website, and I wish everybody would at least take a look at it. I'm sorry, it was September 19th, 1886, called chroniclingAmerica.loc.gov. They have digitized newspapers from major New York, U.S. dailies, and one of them was the New York Tribune, which I accessed, and that happened to be the paper which Lehman quoted from. And I just wanted to see, which is my way, whether or not this is really true. And all I'm saying that in the New York Daily, okay, a major U.S. newspaper, on page 16 was an article called "The Reaction to Rome," in which it explains, and I think it was based on wire reports out of the London Times, that Pope Leo XIII had recovered from an illness miraculously, and that his turnaround was due to the fact that he'd been poisoned by the Jesuits, who said that if he, the Pope, didn't reinstate them, that they wouldn't give him the antidote. So what happened was he got the antidote and he wrote a bull right away reinstalling the Jesuits in full power. That's in a New York newspaper. And everyone can read it. Go to the New York Tribune on that website, September 19th, 1886.
We'll have to put that on the website.
Yeah.
How's that?
We have a lot of references like that, but they're memory holes. It's shocking. And when I first heard this stuff, I laughed. I thought it was ridiculous. And Biz had to take me aside and say, go check it out first. Don't just do the emotional knee-jerk thing. And I did. And the way I put it is, if you're familiar with the old American TV show, The Twilight Zone, it was like walking into a real episode of that. Our history has been stolen and whitewashed from us.
It really is. I get made fun of. What was it? Lou calls me Jesuit James and the Jesuits or something, because no one believes it until they actually sit down, and it's all these old references that really drive it home. And it was so well known 150 years ago. It's only the last 50, 60 years that it's just been completely scrubbed. And then when you mention it, people look at you like you've got three heads.
Well, that's demonstrated by your bibliography, I think, isn't it, Keith, in that so many of the texts are sort of late 1800s, early 1900s.
They were screaming up and down in this country about the fear that we would be taken under papal rule. And as James, you were relating to before, yes, the Pope is, well, first of all, the Pope's a figurehead. It's the Jesuits behind him and the Black Pope, who, by the way, of course, is a Jesuit. So you have Francis the Jesuit, the Black Pope's always a Jesuit, so you've got this amalgam going on. Not that it really matters, I guess, that much.
But can you just break that down for us, if you don't mind?
Huh?
Can you just break that down for us, how that works, that relationship?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. What's really funny. Benedict, when he was in there as a transitional pope, whatever that is, that's a really interesting element, too, there. that you'd have a little temporary pope going on there. But anyway, there was a photo op with Kolvenbach, the previous superior general of the order, also known as the Black Pope, and they had the photo op where Kolvenbach was asking Benedict if he could resign, or retire rather, which is a complete joke. Because just like the president in this country is a figurehead, and there's forces behind him that dictate what goes on, the same thing with the Pope. The white Pope, who's now Francis, was Benedict, and before that John Paul II, they're figureheads. They don't do anything. After that 1822 situation we told you about, when the papacy realized it needed the Jesuits, it's the Jesuits who run the show behind the Pope. And the Vatican, Catholic people, a Catholic lady may get mad at us and all this stuff, but here's what I got to say. The Vatican has always had a duality. It's always been somewhat of an ecclesiastical entity, and also, and more importantly, it's a nation state, folks. It's a nation state, and it's always been involved in global machinations dating back to the Crusades. So the relationship there is the white Pope is a puppet, and the hand that directs it is the Black Pope. And I have to laugh about this, but Godfather 3, that's always been panned as being the worst of the three in the Godfather trilogy, and I'll agree it might be. But what they said in that movie about the way things are, including the banking scandal with the death of, or the supposed suicide of Roberto Calvi, that's why that thing never gets shown with the other two when they show trilogies. Go ahead, Gordon.
The thing that made me laugh the most was the notion that American President Abraham Lincoln was offed by the Vatican. Come on, I couldn't believe that. Then I did my homework. I come to find that is literally one of the most easily provable historical things I've ever read. The references on that, the factual references are, there's very, very many of them, but they're suppressed.
And do you see it the same way with JFK?
You want to move on to JFK?
Well, no, it's up to you, you guys. We've got about 10 minutes, so whatever you want to sort of focus on and drum home, and we will do a follow-up show, and we'll also we'll get as many of these references on the website libertytactics.com so people can read it up, because I think they really need to hit the books before they start believing it themselves.
No, and that's why we publish publish that bibliography. Some of those can be, in fact, a lot of them can be read online if you want to. People who don't want to know this will never do the research. And we've seen this a million times. We know what happens, okay? We get it all the time. If you take a look, like I acted like when I first heard Phelps talk about it, I thought he was crazy. When Gordon first heard it, he thought I was crazy. But I mean, I said, look, just do the research if you want to. If you don't, fine, you're always going to say it's baloney. Now, with regard to Kennedy, I can only give you this. And here, this is coming from me. Kennedy did kind of wag his finger in the face of the Vatican. He did that when he was dumping for the presidency. There's that YouTube, I think, video that's everyone's seen where Kennedy says he would not let the Pope dictate to him. I don't think that helped very much. But I also, now I'm going to say this. Isn't it kind of interesting that Cuba, which we could have taken as a spoil of war from the Spanish-American debacle, we never did. Cuba never gets touched by anybody. And I think that's very interesting. And as much as it's supposed to be a communist country, Fidel and Raul Castro are Jesuit-educated people. It's a show, okay? Now, nobody touches Cuba. And here's my feeling. Kennedy was caught between a hard place and a rock. Now, everybody hated him. I mean, the oil people hated him. The CIA hated him. This guy had more people wanting to kill him than I can imagine, more than like Daffy Duck. But
don't forget Lyndon Johnson in that equation.
Oh, yeah, throw Lyndon in there too. Yeah, of course he knew. But here's the deal. That election was won by Nixon. Everyone knows they threw it to Kennedy, and they used Chicago and Clark County to do it. And he owed the mafia for what took place with Daley in Chicago to give JFK who was supposed to win the election. He had to pay back to them, and they wanted to be reinstated in Cuba because they had been kicked out when Castro kicked out Batista. Now, you'll hear these explanations that, well, the mafia didn't really need Cuba. They had Las Vegas. It's like, give me a break. It's February. Where the hell do you want to go? Las Vegas or Cuba? I know where I'd like to go. So don't tell me they didn't want the casinos back, and JFK had a payoff for being given the election. So there's the Bay of Pigs, which he used the CIA to help him out with. Well, the Bay of Pigs got sabotaged. And guess who did that? The CIA under John Foster Dulles. I'm sorry, under Allen Dulles. Both Dulleses hated Kennedy anyway. But when you read the reason why the Bay of Pigs was sabotaged, how it failed, now get this, and I'll find the book in a couple of seconds, and I'll give you the title where you can read about this. They said that the air cover for the Bay of Pigs was late because everyone got confused about what time zone we were talking about. Cuba's in the east. Nicaragua, which was Happy Valley, from which the planes were setting off from, was in the central time zone, so they didn't know it. You ask anybody in the military, the reason why that can never happen, it's an impossibility, is because they run on Zulu time or Grand Meridian time, so that kind of thing can't happen. And that was given as the excuse, as the reason why the air cover couldn't support the ground cover, which is total crap. That's the reason why it failed. The reason why it failed really was because the CIA pulled the rug out from Kennedy. Kennedy went ahead and wanted to invade Cuba, and the Vatican could not let that happen. And that's my take on it. So, Gordon, you want to go?
Yeah, according to Avro Manhattan in the book Vietnam, Why Did We Go? And, of course, that war was driven by Cardinal Spellman of New York. But JFK tacitly signed off on the assassination of the Catholic Diem brothers in Vietnam, and less than 3 weeks later, JFK himself was dead. That's, very few people talk about that.
You got to remember, too, that the Diem brothers, who were supposedly Vietnamese Catholics, were whacked the week before. So some kind of coup took place there. And also remember something else, that Kennedy spoke before the press club, the Waldorf Astoria, in April of 1962, I think, maybe one. It was a week, it was whatever, it was 10 days after Bay of Pigs.
Is that in front of the press?
How's that?
Was that the one to the press? Was that the speech he gave to the press?
Yes.
The Secret Society.
He gave no speech in Columbia where he foretold his death. But he did, I can send you the clip, but he spoke about that we were facing a monolithic conspiracy. And it did not mean any kind of country. What he said was chilling. In fact, Edwin Sherman, who wrote about the Jesuits, in his book, stated about the Jesuits what Kennedy spoke about, that monolithic conspiracy. And I wanted to share that, to give it side by side, but we're not going to have the time.
It definitely wasn't the Soviet Union, was it?
It wasn't any country. He would have said it. We all wanted the Soviets to be bad guys. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Oh, hell no. I mean, we wanted to hear it was that. He didn't mention any country. He talked about
He talks about secret oaths in it, doesn't he, and things like that?
There was secrecy he was talking about, which might have been addressing
secrecy is repugnant, and he talks about secret oaths and
secret societies.
Yeah, and secret societies. I mean, that's not the Soviet Union he's talking about there.
And he said they don't have armies by day; they have guerrillas by night. That's not the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
No, but the secrecy he was talking about there too, I think it's overplayed a little bit, because I think he was appealing to the press to say, "Hey, look, some things you don't want to talk about." That's my take. Maybe not, but I think that gets overblown. And what's overlooked is what he's talking about, the very thing that they're facing. And as Gordon just mentioned as well, and as you can read in an excerpt, if you put Kennedy's speech, I think April 27, 61, and you'll see what he's talking about. And I think that also was a smack upside the Vatican's head. So I think, at least within 59 to 61, he made enough statements that they might have been a little ticked off at him. And after he tried to take Cuba, that was a bridge too far. And as a result, he wound up dead within, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
People say, some people say, why would they kill Kennedy? He was a Catholic. Well, he was a disobedient Catholic. They read the book Murder in the Vatican by Avro Manhattan. He shows you they killed John Paul I for being a disobedient Catholic.
Let me throw this in real quick because I got the title. You can read this online. The Invisible Government by David Wise and Thomas B. Ross. And the table of contents is there. I'll give you the link if you need it. But it's chapter 4 called The Invasion. And you will hear from two straight-up mainstream reporters, okay? And these guys weren't conspiracy dudes. And they shared what was supposed to be the reason why the Bay of Pigs failed, and it is impossible. It's impossible. So there you go. So all I mean is that The CIA supposedly helped Kennedy do this, and the CIA scuttled it, and they knew exactly what that would mean. And what's interesting is that Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, happened to be in Puerto Rico at the time at a convention. What a great listening post to be at the time of that. So it's a coincidence, I'm sure.
Oh, most of it is.
It sounds like all the future presidents in Dallas on the day that Kennedy was shot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, my God, yes. What a ritualistic killing that was.
Before we go, guys, and we will have to do a follow-up show. Pretty much everybody that looks into anything will know that a massive part of this whole control grid comes out of the banking sector, which is why you always hear people saying, oh, the Rothschilds run the world and all that sort of thing. From my understanding now, the Rothschilds are just Jesuit bankers. Could you sort of touch into that, maybe a bit on the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank? Any connections to that before we wrap up?
And if you could do that in 30 seconds flat, of course, that'd be great.
Okay, well, a handy book that makes a lot of connections between the Rockefellers and the Federal Reserve and the Jesuits is The Federal Reserve Conspiracy and the Rockefellers by Emanuel Josephson.
Right.
Who gets beat up because he's a Jew.
Of course.
So anything he writes can't be true. Here's the deal. In America, the Tea Party thinks it's like some kind of restoration of American values. They happen to find out that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. And by the way, the powers that were delegated to Congress are actually unconstitutional. But go figure that out. And that never was tried in any kind of federal court. But in 1913, when that was incepted, really what it was just another form of the British Board of Trade, which siphons money from the Americans to Europe, and I would assume principally to the City of London and the Vatican. And you're right, there was a time when the Rothschilds had to duke the Vatican, the papacy, some money. But now it's the other way around. I mean, it's a joke. The Rothschilds are not the preeminent moneyed family that they were a long time ago in the Vatican, although it feigns, I guess, kind of somewhat of some humility, is the richest piece of property in the entire world. So when they incepted the Federal Reserve, they also brought in the income tax. So what happened was they created the banking beast, the monster, and they had to feed it. And then they created the income tax, which is an IV into Americans' arm to siphon out the financial blood into the beast. So in other words, the United States has always been paid tribute to Europe. Europe is the center of the universe, and it always will be. And that's why the last manifestation of the Holy Roman Empire is occurring now in the EU, and it's going to be powered eventually by at least Rome.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a very powerful organization, and anybody that thinks that, you know, the most powerful organization for the last couple of thousand years just decided to roll over and secede its power the last couple of 100 years due to the scientific revolution that we're under is smoking something, because, you know, obviously they're the big boys. Keith, Gordon, really loved having you guys on the show, and hopefully you'll agree to come back in a few weeks and do a follow-up show with us, because there is so much to sort of cover. We'll be updating the website page with as much of the information that you guys mentioned today and links to the bibliography, so that people can do the reading. Thanks a lot for being on the show, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, take care, James. Take care, Michael.
Bye now.
On the Guerrilla Media Network. Taking the truth. It's all gonna come out in the end. Liberty Tactics on the Guerrilla Media Network.
Live from London, there's Vital in the Streets.